Hello and welcome to another episode of The Swing. As always, it's your boy HK, and I'm joined by my co-host, that guy Owais, every Tuesday, every Friday in the evenings, live on SportsTrends, where we are not only on our YouTube channel, The Swing Podcast, which you can always follow and watch us live, but on Facebook's SportsTrends Canada, YouTube SportsTrends Canada, as well as the SportsTrends IPTV channel with over 3 million coverage on there. So lots and lots of people to be able to watch us live. And also, as you interact with us and we respond to your questions, you will also be featured live on the show. So definitely do that. And as always, we are sponsored proudly by Thrive Fantasy, which, if you're not aware by now, is a daily fantasy sports props app where you enter contests on a daily basis, just picking very simply over and under on different statistical parameters to win real money every evening. And as a loyal listener of the Swing Podcast, when you sign up and use the promo code SWING, SWING, you do get your first deposit 100% matched up to the first $50. So definitely sign up and prop up today. But speaking of propping up, it seems like injuries are continuing to crop up in the NBA. And today, not only is it myself and that guy Owais, but we will have a very special guest joining us who is not only incredibly experienced with all of what's going on, whether it be not necessarily just basketball, but just athletic injuries as a whole, understanding just how and why we're seeing the number of injuries in the NBA this year, especially given how different this season has been. But that guy Owais can tell you a little bit more because it's been wild.
Absolutely. You know, we talked about it in the last episode where how so many injuries, especially that tragic injury of Jamal Murray in that game where he, I think, tore his ACL.
Yeah, left ACL gone for the season, man.
There goes the chances of the Denver Nuggets for this particular postseason. But I have a fantastic friend of mine, Ivan Wong, who is a physiotherapist resident, and he's also a certified athletic therapist. So, you know, he's had a lot of experience. He's worked with the Centennial College women's basketball team. He's also worked with the York University women's volleyball teams as well. And he's going to join us today, and he wanted to kind of talk about, what's been happening in the injuries, some things that he's noticed within, sports in general, and recovery. And, we just want to kind of get his thoughts, as his expertise is a lot better than our expertise. So we really want to break down what's going on. So without further ado, we'd like to introduce Ivan Wong.
Hey, guys. Hey, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We had an opportunity to listen to a little bit of our last podcast where we really started to break in, and I just reached out to that guy Owais, and it's great for us to have the opportunity to speak with someone who can give a little bit more insight on just everything that we're seeing. It's just getting crazy. Even now, just today, we found out that James Harden's had a setback on his hamstring injury, and he's going to be out indefinitely as well, as will Kawhi Leonard for at least a week with foot soreness as well. So these things just keep propping up, and it keeps getting worse. Is the NBA season in its current form just too grueling for the kind of athletes we have today?
Personally, I'm in the middle. Okay, yes, but I would say the problem right now is because of the season started pretty early, right after the bubble.
Yeah.
The amount of time of so the off season is so short, they aren't able to actually I don't think they were able to fully recover and actually get into that strength and condition state, getting stronger, lifting, right? Rather, they just kind of went okay, let's play the tournament and whatever, couple months, maybe. I think, I don't remember how long it was.
3 months.
Yeah, and then we're to go back in.
Only about 3 months, and then we were lost right in the season. It was bad.
Yeah. So I would maybe perhaps it was because of that, but I do think it's due to a lot of the back-to-back games and the lack of proper recovery, right? Because athletes are going to be going through walkthroughs every day, essentially, right? They won't be practicing full on because obviously for the games. Maybe they do. I don't know. I'm not the coaching staff. But I would say a lot of it has to do with just the way the style has changed, really, like most of the injuries, right? You have your guards driving into the lane, and everyone basically just collapses in, right? Everyone's covering, and the way the injuries are happening are very typical of like all ACL injuries, right?
Yeah.
That plant, twist, pop. That's essentially what happened, right?
Right.
And these guys are super explosive now. The one I saw with with Jamal Murray, there was nobody really on him, right?
No.
It was himself. So
Right.
that's very typical. Like with ACL injuries, 70% is non-contact, right? And 30% is contact. So it's most likely through non-contact. So that plant and twist, it's all by yourself. So much force going through the leg and then going in for a layup or a euro, right?
Yeah.
And that's like just very easy for injury.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so out of curiosity, like, you know, I just wanted to kind of, before we get into the basketball things, kind of talk about what you've experienced over the years. I know you worked with the Centennial, you know, women's basketball team, as well as with the York University women's volleyball teams. And, you know, you have some interesting stories about how, you know, you kind of got thrown into the fire.
Yeah.
And, you know, there was a lot of injuries around that time too that you had to deal with. So kind of talk us through the process of when you like actually assess a player. And then secondly, like, you know, some of the injuries that, you know, you've kind of dealt with, or like, you know, what you do to people who are injured. And especially we'll translate it eventually to the basketball realm with these ACL injuries or Achilles injuries and stuff like that. What would you do to prevent, or at least give, you know, the athlete a fighting chance through the course of the season?
Okay, so I was with the men's and women's basketball team and the women's volleyball team, like you said. Because at that time, we were basically rotated into these teams. So I don't know them from the beginning, right? When I go in, I'm fresh eyes. Like I just go in, my team, that's it. I don't know anything about them, their bodies, what injuries they've had before. So for example, a lot of times when I go in, I actually don't really get to see the players until like start of the season, maybe a couple of days before, just going through like a walkthrough kind of thing. So a lot of times what I notice is that athletes are already injured or have lingering injuries that aren't reported. You know, like a lot, like, you know, like guys want to play. They're not there to just sit on the bench, not do anything. So
For sure.
if they think that they're even 80 to 85%, they'll go play, right? But practice and games are two different beasts, right? Practice is relatively chill. Like you're not too stressed. You're doing like, you know, plays, control plays essentially until you do scrimmage, right? So you don't scrimmage for the whole practice. Whereas games are going like full 110% and you play. So for example, an example was like I worked with the women's volleyball team. I've never seen them. Okay, we went to preseason tournament, and right off the bat, I had a high ankle sprain. Perhaps like she was deconditioned, or it was just tough. Like it was just an unlucky land. Okay, and then at that point, I go on to assess because, you know, players on the field, right, or on the court, whatever, and I assess, and I kind of see like, okay, can you play? I'm talking to the athlete. I do my, you know, assessments on them. And if they can't play, I take them out. As you see, like, you know, they carry and then just walk off the court. And then I do more detailed assessment because it has to be quick. Like there's a lot of pressure in terms of like on-field assessment because refs are like, hey, like we need to play or like just get up. So, you know, you assess quick. It's like, can you walk? No. Okay, let's go. Right. And then I assess on the side while the game still continues, right? And then from there, depending on the severity, right, if it's okay, like, you know, after a couple minutes, they're like, oh, I think I'm okay. Honestly, on preseason, I probably wouldn't put them back just because there's a whole season actually that matters.
Yeah.
Like, who cares about preseason? Like, it's just to get the guys going again.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then if it's severe, like in game, in season, then I would actually just take them off. Like, you're not playing. Let me just like fully assess, basically, essentially wait it out, right? Because like, there's a whole game going on. Then after the game, practice. So they probably wouldn't practice right away. I would actually have certain time scheduled for these athletes to come see me in a clinic setting and do like, my clinical assessment and then treat in there. Like whether it's like using modalities, manual therapy, and even strengthening, right? Like injuries, no matter what, the main thing is prescribing exercise for them to get stronger, back to their baseline, and return to sport. So yeah, that's what's typically that would happen, and I have to speak with the coaches to tell them like, okay, what is the expected timeline, and what are we doing to get them to recovery, to like full recovery, right? And then we kind of go from there.
So out of curiosity, like I know one of the toughest things within, sports is the inability to play. And sometimes, a lot of athletes go out of their way or hide things like you mentioned. Do you feel like, as, the more competitive a league is, do you feel like the more people hide things, or is it more so the opposite, where everything's so out in the open to the public that players essentially will have to abide by whatever protocols you guys kind of put in place for them? Does that make sense? What I just asked?
I think so. Like it's really hard to tell, right? Like some players are really good. They'll play through it, and they end up when they finish the game, they start limping, and they're like, or you're like, oh, are you okay? They're like, oh no, I'm fine. That's how I like whatever.
Yeah.
And you're like, sure. Yeah. I don't think so. Because like ideally, you build enough rapport where you know when a player's lying.
The persons, right?
Like you work with them every day. It's not like you see them like once a week.
Right.
Like I know guys. I'm like, you're hurting. They're like, yeah, I'm hurting. I'm like, what's wrong? Like, come see me.
Yeah.
And then they'll come because like I'm calling them out. Like they can't BS their way kind of out of it. Can I say that? But yeah. Okay, good. So yeah, like most guys, like if you build a good rapport, you'll know. Obviously, some people, they're a little shy. They're like, maybe they won't want to like use the therapist as often, especially in like the university college level. Okay. Cause like these guys, from my experience, like they just want to play. They want to play. Like that's why they're there.
You're right.
They're not there to sit. So like in terms of the NBA and pro, I would say like as much as like, NBA is the professional level, in Div 1, right? Like NCAA Div 1, you're basically pro. Like it's like a lower level pro, but like you're basically professional. Come on.
Yeah.
So a lot of times I think there's so many eyes on these guys that how like they have the draft, right? Like they already have like that where predicted like where they're gonna fall. So these guys are gonna keep that up. They're not trying to drop down, right? That is huge. Like you are making whether it's financial or not, right? Or like, oh, I want to be one of the best, like be known as the best, right? That's why you want to be a top pick.
Yeah.
So it's really difficult. Like I don't have that experience, but I think a lot of it is in their minds, right? As an young athlete, young adult, they're like, okay, like my goal is to be the best, right? No matter how I want, like no matter how I can get there, I'm going to do it that way just to get there.
Yeah.
So
I think some of that is also from a perception standpoint. I think the most, to me, vivid one that I remember of recent years is Andre Drummond, because it was that perception of his back being potentially a problem. All that's like he was supposed to be a top 3 pick coming in, but he dropped all the way down to like 11, 12, 13. He finally got picked just because of that perception that perhaps his back is going to cause him to not be able to reach his potential. And at the NBA level, his back hasn't really been a problem. That hasn't been an extended issue for him. So I get where you're coming from.
Yeah.
I guess my question to that would be, in terms of like that scenario where you're either building that rapport or the people that are coming out, kind of who has the power in that scenario? Like in NBA, you see all the time, players will go back to the locker room and during a game, and then a minute or two back, like Anthony Davis is the biggest of this. I swear he goes to a locker room every game of his entire NBA career. But every minute back, he'll be back in, except for like the one time where he'll now be held out. Is it like in the hands of the physio who's getting that kind of call, or is it kind of like a combination between player and the physio? Is management getting involved? Like where is the pressure often coming from in these cases?
So ideally, the guys that you see going back with the athletes, right, are usually the head medical right? The head of medical, and they know these guys. They have to. They're like the biggest in the whole team, right? In the medical team. So they have the report. Coaches typically will believe, like, trust. Like, he's the professional. Like, the coaches don't know what the medical what's happening.
You look
right?
like you need to play, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it really depends. Like, especially depending on what part of the season you're playing.
Yeah.
Right? Unfortunately, like, we do build that rapport, right? He's like the head medical is going to be build that rapport with the athlete. They'll know them, talk to them. It's like, okay, like, this is what I think. Like, how do you feel, right? And then they're going to either agree with it or disagree, right? If it's dangerous, like if it's like actually very, very dangerous for them to go back, okay, then it's up to me or the medical staff to call that. But if it's, say, for example, like a grade 1 ankle sprain, right? So like a minor ankle sprain relative, tape it up, run around side to side, jump. How's that feel? It's okay. Like, I think I can play. Then sure, like, go back in and we'll deal with it afterwards, after the fact, right? So it's not as easy as, so typically, like, coaches wouldn't stop you, but like, oh no, he has to play. I don't know if they do that. Like, maybe back in the day, probably, but I don't know about now, because like we're so advanced. Like, coaches are really smart too. Like, I think now, like, they're just more in tune with like the medical side of things and everything. So like, they're more like, okay, you know what's wrong, that's fine. And they don't typically push for them to come back too soon like that, right? And plus, they're getting paid a ton of money to.
Yeah, I mean, that's a product at the end of the day, right? Like, you want to protect your best players as much as you can. I mean, you take a look at some of the teams that have been affected by injuries this year. Like, I have a little bit of a video over here where it kind of shows a whole bunch of different injuries that have happened over the course of the season. You got James Harden, you've got, your Jamal Murrays, and it comes down to like the trust with the medical staff. I agree with you 100%. Because James Wiseman with another like freak landing and tore his ACL, and so ultimately you have to look at it in two different ways. You saw the Kevin Durant situation with the Toronto Raptors playoff run in the finals, where he came back maybe a little earlier than he should have, right? And the team cleared them because they looked at the stakes and they're like, we can take this chance and try to win a championship, and it cost them a lot. And the same thing happened to Klay Thompson within that season. I'm sure he was like going through a lot of injuries. But here's the Jamal Murray one. No one really on him, just trying to explode. It kind of reminded me a lot of that Derrick Rose injury in that playoff runs with the first one that he had. And look at this, like, it's just that shiftiness and the weight transfer, and it just, and
it only takes a little bit. It's not even a lot. Right? Once there's an offset of force and the biomechanics of how the body's positioned, it's like, it's over. It's not, it's just like that.
How hard is it to recover from something like an ACL tear or like an Achilles injury? Like, you see this a lot, and this literally affects the entire lifespan of that person's career and life, right? So these are freak athletes in their own right, and they train really, really well and stuff like that. But how much of an impact do these types of injuries have over the course of an athlete's career, but even lifetime? And for an ACL, how long does it typically take to recover?
So for an ACL, right, and you're right, so depending, if it was like a grade 1 sprain, then it wouldn't take too long to recover. He'd probably be back within around like 2 months time.
2 months, okay.
Right, but because he has a full tear, he'll probably be getting a graft, right? Minimum is 9 months, like the fastest, I guess you would say. But
and it's like intense training day to day, or
intense. I mean, with these guys, they're in therapy like every day. So we'll go with like that every day kind of therapy. But the thing is, though, even once the chance of actually re-tearing it's so high within the first 2 years. Okay. Like, you need to think about that. The graft isn't actually it's not a ligament yet. They're taking it from a tendon, right? At that point where the body kind of gets used to that new graft in the knee, and then slowly kind of almost solidifies to become a ligament again, a strong ligament again, so it can take that shear force.
Interesting.
So, it ideally 9 months is that minimum, but I personally think that that's still too early. But it's the NBA, right? The season would have probably started, and you want these guys back. I don't know what the teams would want, but 12 months is probably your average.
Okay.
Yeah, but 9 months is like that minimum. 9 to 12 months is the range. Anything less than that, the risk of re-tearing is way too high.
Is very, very high.
They would not let them. I wouldn't think they would let them go back.
Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you have any other questions, Harris, but
yeah, I mean the idea of the re-tearing and being more prone to injury afterwards is always a big talking point with regards to all of this. But mechanically wise, like, is what I guess could someone do to help themselves be in a better scenario so they don't have that? I mean, obviously Derrick Rose is the most common example of that, but Victor Oladipo is the other one now. Really jumps to mind. Obviously, he had been an absolute Iron Man for his first 4 or 5 years in the NBA. Then he had that injury in the last season with the Raptors where he tore it, and then since then it's been knee, ankle, knee again and again, and it just seems that he can't kind of find himself in a place of health again. So is it something that the player kind of has to fundamentally change about how they go about playing the game, or what is it that they have to do to kind of get themselves back to a place of, I guess, ideal health?
Yeah. So in terms of that, like, I think a lot of times we just think about the body and the injuries as like its own thing. It's just by itself, that's what it is. They should get stronger and they should go back and play. The problem is, like, they probably won't say anything, but part of it is like that mental, like, oh man, like I injured this and I know what happened, and I know how it feels, and I know what I had to do to come back.
Yeah.
So whether they're being sport ready, like physically, is different from being mentally ready, right?
True.
When you just think about that sport ready, like, oh, I can do this and that, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Part of it. This is a little bit more like what I think is like at parts, like we'll say your both legs and knees are like equal strength, equal power, the way you're distributing, right? Through all the testing.
Mm-hmm.
But that's all isolated. There is nobody there. Like, you're doing all the jumps, you're doing all like the strength strength movements, right? There's no one there to actually, like, sport like specific, actually, like how there's bodies in front of you or how you get around them to be tested, right? You wouldn't do that because that's just it would be kind of dangerous because it's uncontrolled, right? When you're playing, like when you're in game situation, there's so many variables. As much as you can strengthen, the knee, the legs, work on knee control, proprioception, stability, and all that, like injuries will happen. I think the best thing is, like, the longer period of time you're playing, like in terms of minutes, the higher risk of injury.
Yeah.
Right?
That's the dangerous thing.
That's the dangerous thing. Yeah. So, like, but it's your career, right? So you can't not play.
Yeah. So really quickly now, like, you take a look at the NBA and you see all these injuries, and we've kind of talked about the schedule and how many back-to-back games there are. Now, do you think the NBA needs to do more for the players' protection and maybe schedule better? Like, what do you think the solution is? Do you think there needs to be more recovery days? In your experience, what needs to change?
I would say I definitely would say reduce the back-to-back games, because again, every athlete's gonna be different. The recovery time needed is not the same, but at least having recovery time would reduce some injury. Like, I think the game style does have its negatives, because everyone's kind of a guard, driving in a lot, and then the closeouts are really fast now. People are so fast. That's why they had to make that rule of, like, give them space, because people are so fast. Like, back then, these guys are like, oh man, like really slow to close out, and then now everyone's just like the same speed.
Yeah,
right?
there was a lot of hand checking
your-
back then too, right?
Your
To kind
four,
of slow that
your
down.
fours are basically like just as fast as like your guards, right?
Yeah,
So it's
Basketball.
insane, right?
the pace of play has immensely increased, and
Yeah,
you can definitely see, like, imagine like you see some of the bigs that we have,
yeah,
Joel Embiid's and whoever else, and you can see the physique is almost becoming one dimensional to some degree as well. They want guys like Jonathan Isaac, if you want to take a prime example, and who can be quick. Boucher is another great example. Kind of like quick, long, lanky, agile, and that seems to be the pace of play. That seems to be the types of players they're looking for. And unfortunately,
sorry. And I would like to add, like, if those bigs, right, are just as fast, they are also extremely stronger than your guards, right? Like you have 220, 225, like fast, like moving side to side, forward, back, right at you, and you're like what, maybe like 200, like 198, 195. You're fast. Like obviously you're fast, but you compare, like it's just you're trying to beat guys that are just as fast as you and essentially weigh a ton more, like way bigger than you. So
that's right.
You're just gonna bounce right off.
Yeah, you think about like prime LeBron in Miami, man. That thing was truck. That guy's an absolute truck and quick. And so like imagine being someone who may think that they're like super fast and super strong, and then just get bullied by this one dude who's just much bigger than you. So you would expect them to be a lot slower, but no, man, this guy's and that's the crazy thing, about athletes, especially at the highest level, is just how immensely strong they are and how immensely fast they are. And so, a lot of people can complain about, these guys aren't that good and blah, blah, and complain because their team sucks, or like they're not maybe as skilled or whatever, they're not scoring as much, and then they'll just be quick to judge. I'm guilty of that sometimes, but these are the best players and the most, to the highest degree of health, very, very strong. And so that's a difficult thing too, right? Like about everything that's been happening these days, you can give them recovery time. You can do a lot for precautions, but injuries will happen nonetheless. And you've spoken about it. And it's just sad to see that a lot of the top players within, this generation of basketball players, and especially the new generation, we see
younger guys, especially
Jamal Murray, Jonathan Isaac, all of these guys who are kind of striving towards that prime or kind of on their way, have a career changing injury. And, we the fans don't get to see him for like a year or 2 years, depending. And even then we don't know if they're going to re-injure, like kind of how you mentioned, like there's a whole 2 years time for that muscle to kind of almost get used to the wear and tear of the season and solidify, but you don't know. And it doesn't seem like the pace of play is going to change. And
so we'll probably end up just seeing more and more of the load management that we're seeing.
A lot of load management.
Just sitting out. I mean, this season especially, you spoke about the back-to-backs. Worse than back-to-backs, we're having 4 games in 5 nights, and it's an incredibly common occurrence this season because of how compressed the schedule is. And obviously the TV deal has something to do with that, and just them trying to get everything into some sort of normalcy for even the next season so that they can have it.
That's the main I think that's also like one of the bigger problems. Like they don't see, I'm not sure, like I don't want to say it, but like the NBA doesn't see it. Like money is over players essentially, right? They want to make that money, and unfortunately, like it affects their lives. And then you have fans that get really angry for the load management because, we have fans that have seen, the older games back in the day where people just grind it out, right? Playing all 82 games, no problem.
Which was the wrong way.
And having lots of issues during off season and maybe at the end of their career, like near the end, especially like, back problems, nerve injuries, right? Like all that stuff, like that comes back to you, right? You only get older as you play in the league, and the amount of time it takes to recover will also increase as you play. So, when Kawhi says that he wants load management, hey man, he knows his money.
Not everybody's like Vince Carter, half man, half amazing. He takes like 3 Tylenols, he's good to go for the rest of the game or the rest of the season. That's apparently his secret to success. But you're absolutely right. I mean, it is definitely something that especially the older heads. I actually had a conversation. There's this incredible app by the name of Clubhouse. I'm sure you've heard of it.
Yeah.
But for some reason, I ended up on this page with a guy named Sean Marion. I don't know if you know him, also known as the Matrix.
Never.
Yeah, never heard of him. So we had a little bit of a conversation. Somehow, some way, I was able to have a that one-on-one moment with him, and I asked him about like the defense in particular. Yeah. But what he kind of went into was like how soft this league is, right? But then at the other spectrum of it, he was talking about how I gave my all, but that also cost my entire body. Yeah. He's talking about
soft, I think, because the rules have changed. Like, you can't say that rules haven't changed. It's protecting the players, right?
Yeah.
So the whole no hand checking and maybe like an extra like aggressive nudge, like refs are easy to call just fouls, right? So fast. So I don't blame the players. If anything, it's just like the rules have just changed. That it isn't the same. It doesn't look as aggressive as it was before. Right. But these guys are driving. These guys are driving into these guys, right? It's still aggressive, but it's not. It doesn't look as aggressive because of all the.
Because there's no fighting anymore. Like, not aggressive. But
that's not part of the game, though. There's no fight.
That's a whole different. That's a culture thing. That's just a belief in.
We don't even let him roll peace throwing hands. Okay.
But the funny thing is, like, there was this one game I went to watch the Raptors, and we kind of snuck in. Shh, don't tell anyone. But we kind of snuck into like near front court, and just hearing the pace of play. Like, when you're up there in the bleachers, you can't really hear what's happening, right? It's just the fans
and it looks slow. It looks slow,
but you get to like floor level and you see how quick the game is, and you see how just the impact of two big guys going at each other when they're going up for a block and a drive, how you can literally hear the people whizzing by, and then the hits and all of that. It's insane. It almost seems like a boxing match, with these basketball players. So like, to those, especially Sean Murray, which I totally disagree with him with like the soft, the league is soft. I'm like, bro, look at your body. You can't move anymore. Like, you're complaining about this. And there's a reason why the league is trying to stop that physicality. It's so people can survive their life without much pain. Exactly. But even the pace of play now, that also needs to be something that the players think about in terms of their longevity. And I think all of us agree we want to see the best players play at all times. But
one thing I want to add is like a lot of the like in terms of like being specialized in basketball or any sport, right? Like, a lot of these guys are specializing so young. Like, especially the kids of ex-professional guys. Yeah. These guys are playing since they're born, right? They're dribbling, Fisher Price nets and stuff. But like, when you specialize that young, you're prone to so many injuries.
Really?
Right? Yeah. So studies have shown that if you specialize later in your the teen years, that's fine. But like, if you start to, or even later, like probably like 16, by playing different sports, you learn to adapt different skills that you probably wouldn't think about. Like, it's not like, oh I'm learning doing swimming will help me in basketball. You don't think about that. But the translation of how your body becomes does, right? So playing like soccer, football, volleyball, and basketball, like any sport really, will translate better in a way that you'll reduce your likelihood of certain injuries because you have experience in other sports, right? So basketball, typically, like, you have your knee injury and your ankles injuries, right? But then, like, if you do other sports, whether it's like even tennis, badminton, soccer, volleyball, you adapt different things. Yeah. You adapt different skills that will translate better, where like you've seen like all these kinds of variables attacking you at the same time and movements, and then you can kind of like navigate better as you play the sport at a higher level.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because back when there was a study done on Michael Jordan in particular, back when he decided he wanted to play baseball now, right? So his, one of the reasons why he was struggling as a baseball player is because the movements were so different as a baseball player than they are of a basketball player, right? And so during the course, that 1 or 2 years that he actually did play, he actually needed to change the way his body moved and the way that his body was shaped. And so that training was immensely different than what you would do with basketball. And I know like a avid swimmer like Ivan over here, a legend in his own right, swimming has an incredibly different impact. But I tend to agree with you. The more different types of movements and sports and situations you put yourself in, the more likely you are to develop strength in different parts of your body that might, counterbalance some of the negative things of another sport in the way that, right? So that's a really interesting point. And I thank you for bringing that up. Or else I don't think any of us would have ever thought of that.
Yeah. I mean, it makes logical sense, right? But you don't think about it once you're kind of like zoned in on this is what I want to do, this is what I want to become great in. So
Pascal has no excuse.
Yes, Pascal plays soccer, Luca plays soccer. LeBron played football, right? So he said that people have said that he could have been a great football player. So.
Or like Anthony Edwards, he plays all the sports, man. And he's really, really good at them.
But it's what was it, Pat Connaughton, right? Who could have played professional baseball, plays professional basketball, had contracts from both sides, and decided to go ahead and pursue. So lots of multi-talented guys at the top of the level in the NBA. So obviously following the advice that Ivan's doling out for all the listeners as well. Don't specialize. Play as much different stuff as you can.
But anyway, man, Ivan, we really appreciate your time today. We've learned a lot, and we really, we had a great conversation with you about, just the NBA, the injuries, and just kind of learning what it is you do. For those of you guys that are in Mississauga, Ivan, you do physiotherapy here in Mississauga, correct?
Yeah.
Do you want to kind of give your little shout out, a little blurb?
If anyone needs some physiotherapy, whether it's sport related or even just like normal stuff, back pain, shoulder pain, you come to Sports Therapy Care. Care is spelled CAIRE. That's at 405 Britannia East in Harlem. So
awesome. And if you guys want, we might put in his number or like a way to contact him in the description. And then, you guys, if you need that help, absolutely go see him. But apart from that, HK, anything else you wanted to add for today's episode or?
No, man, it's nice to be able to speak about something other than just constantly being disappointed by this entire
the
Raptors in particular. So, I really appreciate it. I know we've had a number of different guests on here, all with their different specialties. And I mean, every time it comes on, it just helps enrich the program even more. So thanks a lot, Ivan, for doing it. And thanks everyone for joining us. And as I said, every Tuesday, every Friday, Owais and I are here in the evenings to speak about not only what's going on in the basketball world, but what other things could be there that's potentially affecting what's going on in the basketball world. So as always, follow us on Instagram at The Swing Podcast, on YouTube, The Swing Podcast channel as well. And thanks once again to SportsTrends for providing us the platform to be able to go live on here with you, not only on their Facebook and YouTube channel, but on their IPTV channel as well. So for those of you who are watching on IPTV, thanks for joining. Keep following us, and we will see you on the next one. Take care.
Lillard, long range three. Defended by Simmons. Is this the dagger?